Hello there. Our topic is giving clear information. Do you have any idea what percentage of your time at work is spent giving information to others? First of all, when we give information, we make use of two forms of communication, speaking and writing. The other two forms, listening and reading, we use to get information. If you're anything like the average mother, your time spent communicating divides as follows: 45% listening, 30% speaking, 16% reading, and 9% writing. In other words, managers are giving information in 39% of their communications and getting information in 61%. That's a pretty big chunk of your time. Add to this the fact that your ability to persuade and influence others is one of the most important set of skills you can ever develop. You have read a script of the interview that Jan Donaldson performed with Ted Riley as part of his application for a job in the mailroom on pages 10 and 11. And now you will be analyzing that script by applying the three dimensions of aim, bias, and climate to it. Let's roll the video. Ah, you must be Ted Riley. I'm Jan Donaldson.
Hello.
Hi, have a seat.
Thank you. The woman in Human Resources that interviewed me said you'd want this.
Oh yeah, thank you. Oh, I see you went to Abraham Lincoln High School here in the city. Did you know Joe Smigolski?
No, that name doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, Joe Smigolski. He was captain of the football team. He won an athletic scholarship to Eastern State. He played pro ball there for a while. He was in all the newspapers a few years back.
What was that name again?
Smigolski. Oh, no matter. So, you worked at MCL up until about 5 weeks ago. What made you decide to leave MCL?
Well, I had been with MCL for about 3 years and I just felt like I wasn't getting anywhere.
Well, that's as good a reason as any. And what made you decide to interview with us?
Well, I did see your ad in the newspaper.
Well, there must have been several ads. What made you decide on us in particular?
Well, I do have interviews set up with other companies that advertise, but those are for different kinds of jobs.
Oh, I see. Okay. I find some of the things you've listed as your hobbies very interesting. Collecting World War II souvenirs, model railroading, reading American history, and hiking.
Well, I've been a history buff for a long time, and the whole model railroading thing, that's something me and my dad do.
That's very interesting. Do you own your own layout on the model railroading, or do you belong to a club and have your own cars and engines and use the club's layout?
Well, it sounds like you know something about it. I do actually belong to a club nearby, and as a matter of fact, they elected me president last year. We have 17 members, and we meet every other Wednesday night.
Really? Now, why do you think they elected you president? I mean, there were 16 other candidates, so what qualifications do you possess that led to your election?
Man, that's a tough one. I guess because I'm the most active member. I've never missed a meeting. I arranged a joint meeting with the railroad clubs nearby. I guess they just like me. And they're also a great bunch of guys.
It really sounds like a lot of fun. All right, Ted, I'm going to tell you some things about the job and then ask you some questions. To begin with, the job requires some lifting. Not often, but maybe several times a week you'll have to deliver some cartons weighing 50 to 60 pounds. So, are you in good physical condition?
Oh, that's no problem. I do run every morning and, go hiking on the weekends.
That's good. And then there's the matter of overtime. You may have to work some overtime, maybe once or twice a month. Are you married, or do you have any other commitments that might make it difficult for you to work overtime if I needed you to?
Nope. And as a matter of fact, I could use the extra money.
Well, we pay straight time up to 40 hours, and then overtime for any hours worked over a 40-hour week. So here's a copy of the job description. Why don't you take a look at this, and I will go over your application form and see if I have any questions.
Is this mine to keep? I mean, may I make notes in the margin?
Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. What do you think of the interview that Jan held? Did she seem nervous or unprepared? On pages 10 and 11, we asked you to make notes in the margin of the script indicating what you did and didn't like about Jan's handling of the interview. What I'd like to do now is ask you to critique Jan by responding to the multiple choice items on page 12 and 13. And we'll discuss each item as we go through it, as well as review how Jan answered the same questions regarding her own perception of the interview. Let's take a moment to recall how the interview started. Ah, you must be Ted Riley. I'm Jan Donaldson.
Hello.
Hi, have a seat.
Thank you. The woman in Human Resources that interviewed me said you'd want this.
Oh yeah, thank you. So, how did you answer number 91? Jan didn't like choice B. She didn't want to increase a nervousness Ted might be feeling. Instead, she chose D, engaging in small talk about his high school and Joe Smigulski, which backfired on Jan a bit as Ted had never heard of him. Engaging in small talk can be useful if it puts the other person at ease. But was there any evidence that Ted needed to be put at ease? Often, the best way to establish rapport and to set the other person at ease is to state the purpose of the meeting, describe the game plan, and to get on with it. Continuing our analysis, a job applicant Jan has never seen before has just entered the office and handed her an application. Her first priority should have been to study the form and decide what questions to ask and what areas to explore. The remaining two choices, A and C, would each buy her time to study Ted's application form. However, one of them is likely to bias Ted. Do you know which one? Do you think there's any danger in giving Ted the job description to read? Could it shape the way he answers questions and adjust his stated strengths and weaknesses? The correct answer to 91 is A. Now, let's move to number 92. But first, let me remind you that these multiple choice items can have more than one correct answer. Pick whatever selection you feel are appropriate. Oh, I see you went to Abraham Lincoln High School here in the city. Did you know Joe Smigulski?
No, that name doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, Joe Smigulski. As we discussed earlier, you probably wanted to establish a positive climate and can do so by letting Ted know that you are already familiar with his high school. But what happens when Jan lingers on whether or not Ted knows Joe Smigulski? Does it help or hurt the interview climate? The correct answer is C. Any other selection is likely to make Ted less comfortable, which may affect the quality of the interview. Let's move on to number 93. He was captain of the football team. He won an athletic scholarship to Eastern State. He played pro ball there for a while. He was in all the newspapers a few years back.
What was that name again?
Smigulski. No matter. So, you worked at MCL up until about 5 weeks ago. Jan was just about to get into Ted's prior employment history. She wants Ted to talk about things that will help her to see how well fitted he is for the job. Which of the choices will satisfy our 3 criteria of aim, bias, and climate? Jan selected choice B, feeling as though it would provide important information. So will choice D, which gets to Ted's self-confidence, his outlook on life, and his attitudes towards work. But how about choices A and C? Do you think they also provide critical information? Not really. Choice A asks what Ted has been doing since he left MCO. This would score low on our aim dimension since it's not too relevant. And the answer to C is similarly irrelevant. Let's move on to number 94. What made you decide to leave MCL?
Well, I had been with MCL for about 3 years and I just felt like I wasn't getting anywhere.
Jan chose C, but that wasn't an effective probe to find out why Ted felt that he wasn't getting anywhere. Which answers seem to get us where we want to go? The wording of B is likely to sound too biased. What do you mean you weren't getting anywhere? Ted might then become defensive, thinking that his answer wasn't appropriate. The bias is too high and the climate too low for such a statement. So the answers A and D are the correct answers to 94, since these are the responses that will lead Ted to explain why he wasn't getting anywhere without biasing his explanation. Are you ready for number 95? Let's see what happens. Well, that's as good a reason as any. And what made you decide to interview with us?
Well, I did see your ad in the newspaper.
Well, there must have been several ads. What do you think Jan is trying to accomplish? I think she wanted to find out what he already knew or thought about the company, don't you agree? She found out that he didn't have much knowledge, and he had simply seen the ad in the newspaper. So which of these 4 choices on number 95 will be likely to get you what you're looking for? Ted might see choice B as being corrective or pushy, while choice D looks too unstructured, like asking someone what they want to be when they grow up. Choices A and C are most likely to give Jan what she wants. Jan uses choice A, and that's when Ted mentioned that he had interviews scheduled with other organizations. Let's replay that interaction.
Well, I do have interviews set up with other companies that advertise, but those are for different kinds of jobs.
Oh, I see. Okay. What conclusions did you come to based on Ted's last remark? Is there any evidence to support choices A or D? Not really. Similarly, with choice B, Jan didn't assume that he was well qualified simply because Ted had interviews with other companies. Therefore, choice C is the desired answer on number 96. Good work. Let's review the answers. A, C, B, and D. A and D, A and C, and C. We hope you've learned some valuable information about the do's and don'ts of giving clear information. Thank you for joining us. The flow of information in an organization is like the circulation of blood in your body. Both are vital to health and growth. The decisions you make, the problems you tackle, the people and projects that you manage, they all depend on your ability to get the right information in the right amount of time at the right time. Think of the 2 ways that you receive information at work, spoken and written. What would you guess is the percentage of information that you receive in spoken form, phone calls, meetings, one-on-one sessions, and in written form, memos, newsletters, your PC. Take a moment now to assign a percentage to each, and then write down your 2 percentages. Most of us rely quite heavily on the spoken word for the day-to-day information that we need to function effectively as managers, and the spoken word has certain advantages over the printed word. It's more timely. It usually takes less effort to get it, and you can interact with the sources to make sure that they understand your needs and that you understand their information. But the basic problem of getting information from others is biased. Let's define bias as the distortion of information, the failure to present things exactly as they are. Bias can be intentional or unintentional. That is, the speaker may or may not be aware that bias is entering the message. Here are some examples of bias at work. Jan's boss is winding up a session with her immediately following the weekly staff meeting.
Why don't you get a hold of Human Resources and have them email it to you?
Okay.
Well, think about it. Hey, I thought we had a great meeting today. What do you think?
Yes, I thought it went very well. Notice the boss at work. I thought that we had a good meeting today. What do you think? Of course, Jan is likely to agree with her boss. If he really wants to find out how she feels, he should have said, "How do you think the meeting went today?" and not answered himself. Bill Taylor is an achiever. He knows what he wants and is not always aware of the degree of distortion that is present in the information that he gets from others, largely because of the bias he introduces often unnecessarily. Shirley, who heads word processing, has just handed out copies of the cards that she made out for each of her people to attach to a job before returning it to its author. Jan replies with, "What authors do we have and what are they writing?"
That's just a term for anyone who writes or submits anything for proofing. Cheryl, I think the name tags are a great idea. How about the rest of you? How do you feel?
Looks good. 2 examples of bias here. First, Bill's tone and condescending manner in answering Jan's questions came across as a put-down. Jan is less likely to ask questions in the future. And second, if Bill wants to get a genuine, unbiased reaction from the group, then he needs to avoid heavily biased statements. "Shirley, I think your cards are great. How did the rest of you feel?" And the last few minutes of the staff meeting, Bill has asked how his people are coming with their goals and objectives for next year and whether they'll be done by this Friday. I don't think this is what you want to hear, but I'm having trouble setting goals and objectives for the mailroom. I mean, our job is to respond to the daily flow of mail, whatever the volume. I can't set a goal to control the volume, so the best I could come up with is that our goal would be to process the incoming and outgoing mail as quickly as possible, hopefully within a half day of receiving it. And I'm going to have the same issue with fulfillment, but I don't think that's what you want to hear.
Is anyone else having trouble with their objectives?
I've got mine done. I don't know if it's going to make you happy, but I had no trouble doing it.
Well, this isn't what you want to hear. I'm sure it's not what you're looking for. Well, I've got mine done. I don't know if it's going to make you happy. All 3 comments indicate a strong need to say what they think Bill wants to hear. Things that will make him happy. These examples illustrate one of the main sources of bias. People tend to say what they think you want to hear. It's human nature. You arrive at work at Monday morning to greet your friend Joe with, "Good morning, Joe. How was the weekend?" Well, Joe happened to have a miserable weekend. The kids were sick, the lawnmower wouldn't start, the golf game was rained out, but Joe says, "Just fine. How was yours?" Now, why did Joe lie? Or was it really a lie? Or was it human nature to take the path of least resistance and say what you think that the person wants to hear? Or someone asked your opinion of a dress or a suit that they're wearing that you don't particularly care for. Are you going to say what's on your mind or what's expedient? Unless you're looking for an argument, you probably won't tell them that they look awful. You may temper your thoughts with a more neutral comment like, "Wow, that's a very interesting suit." Or perhaps, "You know, I've never seen you in anything like that before. It's sort of a new look." There are many reasons why the information that we seek from others gets distorted or biased. We just looked at one reason. the tendency of people to say what they think you want to hear. Take a minute to write down as many other reasons that you can think of, reasons why information is often biased. Listening. We practice it every day, but yet studies show we only retain and understand about a quarter of the messages we hear. Listening is often defined as organizing what you hear to help you remember things. Now that's okay if you're listening to a lecture or a speech or anything where the message has been well thought out in advance. Unfortunately, that's not the case in most of the messages that we listen to in a typical day. Often the people that I interact with haven't thought through their messages in advance. They ramble or repeat or contradict themselves. I've almost got to guess what they're going to say and then check to see if I was right. And that's what analytical listening is all about. When a person speaks, we've got to listen and make educated guesses as to what's going on inside, what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And then we get additional comments to either support or contradict our initial guesses. So what happens if the additional information we get contradicts our initial guesses? We form new ones. To listen analytically, we must guess the speaker's meaning and intention, probe for more information to support or contradict our guesses, and confirm or modify your understanding accordingly.
I'd also like to spend a few minutes now discussing what you might be doing to prepare for the review.
Sure. I'll just be glad to get it over with, so the sooner the better.
Okay, let's see how this week looks. How's this Wednesday at 11?
That's fine.
Now, so as to assure that we make the best use of our time together, I'd like you to prepare for the review, so it's not a one-way affair.
Okay, what do you want me to do?
Well, I'd like you to look at the ratings from last year's appraisal and see how you think you've done on each since then. I'd like to give some thought to areas you want to improve in and what each of us can do to help you improve. It might be useful to look at your job description to see if it still reflects what you're doing or should be doing. In other words, are there any omissions or commissions we should look at?
You know, can we also look at my goals and objectives for next year like we just did for Jim's?
Well, it's not part of your performance review or the appraisal system, but I'd be glad to look at them. So why don't you give them to me Wednesday at the review? Then I can look them over and get back to you later in the week.
Okay, I'll try to have them ready by Wednesday.
Okay, well, I guess that does it. Do you have any questions?
No, I'll give some thought to those areas you suggested. Oh, and I'll have to get a copy of last year's review. Do you happen to have one?
No, I don't think I do. Why don't you get a hold of Human Resources and have them email it to you?
How do you think Bill did as an active listener? I caught at least 2 instances where he should have gotten more information from Jan to support or contradict his guesses as to how she is reacting. I'll share them with you. In the first case, when they were setting a time for the review, Jan said that she would just be glad to get it over with, and Bill seemed to ignore it. I felt that Jan's comment was important since it seemed like she might have a negative attitude toward reviews. The second instance was when Jan mentioned that she didn't have a copy of last year's appraisal, and Bill didn't pursue this to say why. I'd like to show you another episode, this time between Bill and Brian. Bill is giving Brian an assignment. Let's listen in on the start of their meeting.
Now, since you've done an especially good job on safety and accident prevention among your own people, I thought you'd be the one who could do the best job of looking into the whole problem of safe driving and what we can do as an organization to take measures to reduce accidents on the road.
It sure is a problem, and it's not getting any better. Did you hear about Joe Beasley's accident last week?
Yeah, I understand he'll be out 5 to 6 weeks.
Listen, Bill, I'm not really very clear on what you'd like for me to do. Maybe you could elaborate for me.
Well, the one thing we're sure of is the objective. Our goal is to reduce accidents on the road. If we do so, we'll also reap other benefits, lower insurance costs, not as much lost productivity, and so on.
Are we only concerned with travel related to the job with employees who are driving one of our vehicles?
No, we're looking at our employees' health and safety as a 24-hour-a-day concern. Safe driving's not a 9-to-5 habit.
Did you notice the questions Brian asked to make sure he understood the assignment? Actually, in this scene, both Brian and Bill are showing skills of active listening. I suspect that Bill generally deals with Brian on an adult-to-adult basis, whereas his interactions with Jan are on a parent-to-child basis. And that influences how effective Bill is as an active listener. We listen to certain people quite effectively, and others we tend to tune out or listen to half-heartedly. When Bill is being parental with Jan, his listening skills suffer because when we act on a parent-to-child basis, we're more apt to believe that the person we're listening to should be seen and not heard. I'm sure you can see how that would affect our ability to listen well. I'd like you to take a sheet of paper and spend a minute or so listing the names of 3 or 4 people who you often tune out, people you don't listen to effectively. Then, beside each name, write down some of the reasons why you tend to listen with only half an ear. Does your list include names of people who usually had nothing to say or usually take forever to say it? Perhaps we aren't using our active listening skills to draw out effective information from these people. We've talked about probing, but we haven't discussed steering and summarizing. All 3 are tools of an active listener. We probe to get more information, we steer to keep the interaction on target, and we summarize